Welcome back to the program. I am really excited about today's guest. Caleb Stinson's a friend, been in the industry for a number of years. He's a CMO of Exencial Wealth Advisors. Welcome to the program, Caleb.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Love to have you here. A little bit of your background, 4.5 years plus or minus at Exencial, operations role and now leading marketing. Again, congrats on that. And prior to Exencial, you were at Seagate Technologies doing some project management stuff. Tell us a little bit more about your experience at Exencial.
So, before Exencial, Seagate, before that, a few other jobs. I got my first job at 13 years old, started working. And this is important because you kind of look back on life and everything that happens in life leads you to a moment. And so with that first job, it was kind of custodian type work. And so I worked with a lot of people. And so I kind of learned customer service within that role. So now you fast forward all the way to Exencial. What are we doing? What are we building? From a marketing standpoint, we're really focused right now on lead gen. And then how does that customer service kind of work its way into lead gen? I'd say our focus is on relationships with the leads, the prospects, so that they can become clients. And so, I look back on my life and that first job I got, and I can see how it all kind of played a role in getting me here to Exencial.
Love that. Love connecting the dots. Well, let's get into it. So tell us a little bit about your firm, and specifically, if you could hit on the philosophy of marketing at Exencial.
Yeah. So we're primarily based out of Oklahoma, Oklahoma City to be specific. We've got 25 plus advisors. And so when you have that many advisors, marketing can get interesting. Different advisors want kind of different things. And so the approach that we take is we try to keep it at firm level marketing as opposed to individual kind of advisor campaigns. We have a smaller marketing team. And so we provide assets for different things the advisors may want to do, but we try to keep it at a firm level branding.
Love that. So firm level, so you don't have advisors sort of going off, doing their own sort of things in market. You're providing the collateral, you're providing the campaign overview of what they could do and how they could do it. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty close. I mean, I think some advisors may come up with some good ideas. That happens quite a bit, and so we'll try to figure out how we can help with that if we can manage it. And so there may be a few one-offs, but primarily, we're focusing on here's kind of firm level. Here's how we try to direct traffic from a marketing perspective to the firm to enable the advisors to be able to do their job.
Love it. Love it. So we're going to spend the bulk of this episode talking about your work in lead gen. You and I have had a number of conversations about the topic. And I know you're quite adept at understanding lead gen providers and thinking about how to best manage lead flow throughout the month. Make sure that for your 25 advisors, you're getting the right leads to them at the right time. Pacing, you've said, is really important. Tell us a little bit more about your lead acquisition strategy.
Yes, I think there's a couple of things that are important. And, when you start this, we've been doing this for a little while. When you start this, there's a lot of lessons to learn. And so I will humbly admit we learned some of those the hard way. But there's a lot of benefit in having multiple providers. Each provider kind of has a personality, and you got to get to know the personality of the lead provider and how it functions from, you split up a month into 4 weeks. So you kind of have week 1, 2, 3, 4. Providers function and act differently from week 1 to week 4. Week 1 and week 4 are typically the hardest weeks to maintain consistency, just with the way that the everything kind of functions, the systems. But each provider does that function differently. And so our challenge, or what we've had to kind of learn, is how to pace. We've got 2 callers who, as the leads come in, these are kind of our appointment setters. And you want to keep them busy, but you don't want to keep them so busy that they're overwhelmed. You still want to have good, speed to lead is important. And so if you have too fast of a pace on the front end, speed to lead is degraded. If you have too slow of a pace on the front end, then people are kind of looking for what to do next. And so pacing is important. Having multiple providers, lead sources, allows you to be able to have a bit more control over that pace.
Awesome. And so are you measuring? So obviously pace and volume of leads coming into the system, making sure you're adequately feeding the callers so they're not overwhelmed, underwhelmed in terms of their workload. Are you looking at things like cost per lead across different lead sources? And any other variable metrics from the different sources that you work with?
Yes, there's quite a few metrics. I mean, in this lead gen game, if you will, that you can measure everything. And so I think it's important to know what's important to you, and it's important to sometimes less is more. Let's say it that way. So we do look at kind of cost per lead, and then there is what we've kind of found through trial and error is there's a turnaround time for when you make an adjustment with a lead provider for them to then make an adjustment and then for that to actually have an effect to, like, let's say the end user or the lead. And so that all takes, with some providers, it seems like it's close to a week turnaround. For others, it feels like it's 3 weeks. And so the more data that you can get on the front end, the quicker you can make changes and the quicker you can realize the results of those changes. So to do this, we implemented a lead rating system just internally. So the caller, the appointment setter kind of rates the lead. And then when that lead is converted to like a meeting or an appointment, the person who's doing that appointment will also kind of rate the opportunity. And what that allows is it allows for a quicker feedback loop than just, is it closed won, closed lost? That can take quite a bit longer. Sometimes on some of the channels, the life cycle of lead to meeting set to, new client can be 90 to 100 days. And so that feedback loop, then if you add 3 weeks to making a change with a provider, it's too long. So how do you shorten that up? That's kind of the question that we had as we got into this more and more. And so we measure cost per lead, we measure conversion, so what we would call meeting set rate per channel, and then kind of that A/B rating system so that we can have a quicker turnaround on the feedback loop.
I suspect when you talk about lessons learned, those metrics, having that lead rating process in place are probably top of your list of lessons learned. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yes.
If you're not measuring,
No, yeah. If as you were saying, if you're not measuring this stuff, then you don't really know what you have. And so, again, there's a lot of ways to slice the data and look at it. And once you start looking at enough data, there's the story that it tells, and then sometimes there's the story that you want it to tell. And it's important to not force a story out of the data. You want to allow the data to tell you what's reality and not what your perception is of it.
awesome. And maybe if I could ask on that lead rating, so the callers are making a score, and the advisor on initial meeting making a score. What are some of the attributes that go into that score? What are they? How are they rating a lead?
Yeah, so there's a couple of main things. I mean, there's some things under the hood, but the main components would be, is there a need? Is there something that we can really help with? Are we really going to be able to help this individual, this prospect, with this need? And then there are some AUM level metrics. But I think first and foremost for us, we want to help people. That's why a lot of people are in this business. If you talk to advisors and ask them kind of their why, or You talk to even some of the people that do client service work, relationship manager work. A lot of them, their why is they like to help people. And so we know that things are just going to go better. The relationship with an eventual client is going to be stronger, healthier if there's a reason for the relationship beyond just AUM. And so we're always looking for, um, is there a need here? Can we help with that need? Are we the best fit for this? And so that's kind of wrapped up into that metric.
I love it. Some really qualitative measures on who that lead is, who you are as a firm, who the advisor is as a practitioner, and making sure there's the right match there. Love that. So let's jump in a little bit. So we talked about leads. So we're talking about the top of the funnel. Could you talk a little bit about and maybe give an outline for your full funnel, your full client acquisition funnel? Maybe talk a little bit about the stages. We talked about cost per lead, but what are the other metrics that you look at as a lead goes through the process?
Yeah, so we've got a few different stages that we kind of look at, and then as we think about a lead life cycle, as it moves to the life cycle, we kind of look at different metrics for those stages. And so, a lead comes in, it's new, and then we're reaching out. So we've got our callers who are reaching out via phone, and then we've got some email campaigns that we've kind of set up. And from all the different lead providers, we've kind of narrowed it down to there's kind of four major concerns that a prospect may have. And sure, you can slice those a little bit differently. Maybe there's a few more concerns, but um, if you try to build for everything, you'll never go to release. You'll never go to production. And so we narrowed it down to four major primary concerns. And so as a lead comes in, the caller or appointment setter, their job is to kind of look through the information that's there, try to make a phone call and get a hold of the individual if we can. But if we get voicemail or we can't get a hold of them, then they're going to pick one of those four primary concerns. And then we have email campaigns kind of built around those primary concerns, and they start working, their way through those campaigns. And so you have a new lead, you kind of have outreach initiated. And outreach initiated is we're trying to contact them, and that can take, it can be as quick as 5 minutes, or it can honestly never happen. And so we go from new to outreach initiated. The next piece is contacted. We initiated outreach. Now we've actually contacted somebody. There is a person on the other end of this form. And so now we're to the point of, hey, is there something that we can help with? And is this a good fit between the prospect and the firm? And then if it is, at that point, you're either, have a meeting set, or, we're going to tell you like, no, this really isn't the best fit, and there's no meeting set. And, that's where everything would stop. Once a meeting is set, that's where we kind of bring in, that's where we'll bring in either an advisor or BDO. And so this can kind of happen two ways. And to a degree, it depends on how things are going between the caller and that prospect. If there's a really good relationship there, you may have a warm handoff between the caller and the BDO. And so what that would look like is maybe there's a Zoom or phone call between this prospect BDO, and the caller would actually join maybe the first 5 to 10 minutes of that. And hey, this is advisor X that we had talked about. I've brought him up to speed. And so it's a much warmer handoff, and then they may drop off the call. Or if it doesn't feel right, it may just be a cold handoff, and it's, hey, I let advisor X know everything that they need to know, and they'll be on that call. And so we allow the appointment setters to try to determine what's best. And then also advisors and BDOs kind of have their preference. Some advisors, BDOs, they want to just be on the call by themselves, and we respect that. We allow that. At the end of the day, our job or our goal is to try to have successful outcomes for the prospects, successful outcomes for the advisors, and successful outcome for the firm. Those are kind of our three main goals. And so we're constantly shifting, changing, depending on what's right for the situation.
By the way, I just sorry to interrupt, but I love the fact that you put the ideal outcome for the prospect first. That's, at the end of the day, this is about relationship building. And, if it's right for them, it's right for the firm.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, relationship building, I think that's so key. I can kind of think of the funnel, and I'm a little bit of a data person, and so I have to try to pull back a little bit there when it comes to data. But when you think about that funnel that we just kind of walked through those stages, the contacted stage is really, really key. And one of the things we really try to focus in on is how do you make the experience humanizing? What I like to say is you have to slow it down and have a human to human conversation. Do you hear a dog barking in the background? Is there a child crying? What's kind of going on in their world? What's the prospect thinking and feeling? When they submitted that survey, they did it for a reason. What are they thinking and feeling on the other end of that now that you're calling them? Have they already gotten some calls from other firms potentially? How did those go? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Slow it down, humanize the conversation, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We're all, we all have hopes, dreams, and fears. And if we can't connect with those, then the relationship isn't going to be as good as what it could be. And so slow it down, humanize the conversation, ask about, the day, ask about how they're doing, make them feel heard, make them feel understood. Because ultimately that's what we're going to do. And if we get into a big rush, you can kind of breeze over that. And really, it's the most important thing.
Yeah, you can get lost, and you've talked about in prior conversations that we've had, you've talked about getting lost in spreadsheets. And yeah, this is a relationship business. It's one person to another, and it's a trusted relationship where somebody's managing their client's future, financial future. And that is very much a human experience. So I appreciate you sharing that. Is that something? How does that manifest itself with the callers and maybe with the advisors? Is that some training? Is it leveraging data to make those personal connections? How does that come about in the process?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a couple of different ways. I mean, I think there are data pieces that maybe come in through providers. One of those providers maybe even being Catchlight. But at the end of the day, I would say, be in the moment where you are. And then how do you prepare for that moment? It sounds good, but and how do you prepare for that moment? Um, One of the ways that we've done that is I get the whole team together. We sit around a conference room table and we practice. Ring, ring. Somebody answers, and everybody kind of has a persona, and you run through it. I'm going to be somebody who's really busy, and you're going to have to find out how you can help, and we run through it, and then we all critique each other. I think a dangerous thing in any industry or job is ego, especially here within lead setting, appointment setting, lead generation, marketing. We're here for the firm. We're here to serve the firm. That's something I always appreciate when people say serving the firm. I think you mentioned as well, like serving as CMO. It is a job of service, and so there shouldn't be an ego involved. We all sit around the table, and even though I don't make calls daily, when we sit around the table and we practice, I always make sure to do my part. I pretend like I'm answering the phone, and that's a humbling experience. And then everybody critiques me, and then you realize, like, yeah, this isn't the easiest job in the world, but it's needed. This is needed. We've got to have these relationships. And so part of it is if you focus a lot on that relationship with the client, and you really train there and hone that in, I think the end result of that is a great relationship with advisors and BDOs kind of across the firm. Because if we prioritize kind of the day to day, then when we have those conversations with advisors, it's kind of already baked in.
Yeah, and it makes me think about a comment you made when we caught up a few weeks ago. That balance between speed to lead, which I think the industry is very in tune with, Especially if you're working with a lead provider, perhaps that provides a lead to multiple firms, there's competition there, and we do know that uh, speed to lead is a thing. We've seen some data that suggests that even cutting it by 4 minutes could increase conversion rates to next step by 15%. But there's that balance between that speed and making that human connection. Any deeper insights on that? Because I think it's an important area. It's important balance, especially as you think about humanizing the experience.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there. You know, speed to lead obviously is very important. There's been a lot of statistics on that, but I would say, speed to lead is important, but you got to know who you're calling. Um, and so if you, for instance, are so quick to call a lead, but you get their name wrong because this is your 60th call of the day, then being quick doesn't matter. And so you've got to slow it down a little bit. And, you also want to have speed to the right lead. If you think about a system that's generating, um, 10, 20, 30 leads a day, 80 leads a week, whatever it might be, these leads kind of come in patches and you get familiar with this. This goes back to the kind of personality of the lead provider. So you kind of learn those personalities. So, but if you think about this from a caller perspective, hey, I just got off a great call with a prospect. I set a meeting, maybe the call was 20 minutes long. Now in my queue, I've got another 10 leads. Who do I call first, right? Speed to lead is important. Everybody agrees, but who do you call first? One of the ways that we kind of streamlined that is we use the Catchlight score. We're going to call everybody. We're going to put that work in, but how do you pick who you call first? We just use the Catchlight score. We look at that profile. Then we make that phone call and try to connect.
So leverage that data that you see in the profile. That's who are they? You talked before about if you hear a dog in the background barking, you can ask about their pets, and if you know that they have pets based on their profile, that's something you could lean into and initiate versus it being more reactive to what you may hear in the background. Want to go back a little bit to something we talked about before, and as you start to engage a lead, you talked about 4 different tracks based on the potential need for the prospect. Could you talk a little bit more about what you're doing to engage that prospect beyond that initial call, or perhaps beyond the initial meeting with the advisor?
Yeah. So these email campaigns that we've written on these kind of 4 different subjects, obviously the prospect has reached out for a reason, right? And so they're looking for some help on something. And so what we're trying to do with these email campaigns is let them know that we actually are here to help. Here's some of maybe the difficulties that can be experienced whenever this is your issue, and that issue would be whatever primary concern has been selected. Here's maybe what people experience when they're trying to work their way through this. Here's how we can help with that. Would you like to book a meeting and learn more? And so I think everything kind of in our system points to getting that conversation so that we can have the relationship. But I think it's important to note that everybody's circumstances change. And so the way I kind of like to think about this is there's like a window of opportunity, and it opens, it closes, but it has a cycle. And so you think about maybe the prospect completes a survey, a form, whatever it is, they come in through your funnel today, but tomorrow, for some reason, the window of opportunity is closed. Well, what we want to do is we want to be a good steward of that lead, of that prospect. And so we'll continue to drip on that individual, and then we may stop for a time kind of in our process, and then we'll pick it back up. And the reason that we do that is because we know that windows of opportunity kind of come and go. But the best thing that we can do is try to take care of that prospect, eventually, hopefully a client. And so if we can time it to where when the window of opportunity opens, Exencial Wealth Advisors is who they think about, then we can have a better outcome.
Love that. Yeah, you've talked about retargeting. You've talked about leveraging brands. So when that time manifests itself for the prospect to really lean in, they're thinking about your firm. Super important. All right, Caleb, we're up to our last question here. If you knew then what you know now, so transport yourself back 5 years ago, and you're the newly minted CMO at Exencial Wealth. What would you have started or stopped or done differently 5 years ago?
That's a good question. There's a lot of ways to answer this, but I would say this is a difficult job. So, you know, um, if you're listening to this or watching this later, it's a difficult job. There's a lot of things that go into this. And so I would say start small, maybe even a little smaller than we originally started. I would also say there's a lot to learn as you go through this, and each process or each kind of milestone within the process brings its own intricacies and hurdles. And so as you're working your way through this, if you can manage your way down to fewer hurdles, you can have success quicker. What I mean by that is when we kind of started this, we did some keyword items, keyword search, kind of paid search on some different platforms. And that actually created more hurdles because you're trying to learn how those algorithms work. Then when you get a lead, you have to figure out how to manage the lead. And so I would probably, if I was doing this all over 5 years ago, I would start with just paid lead providers, because then you don't have to figure out how to manage the algorithms. It does have a little bit more of maybe a cost up front, but you're paying a cost, whether it's up front or it's a little bit later, you're still paying a cost. And so I would say figure out how to handle the lead, figure out how to manage the prospect, how to manage that relationship really well. And then once you have that process, then if you want to figure out an algorithm or whatever you'd like to do next, then you can do that. And you've already got your lead process figured out. We started with trying to figure out the algorithm and then working our way through the lead process. And on the other side of it, I'm happy to have a lot of that knowledge, but it would have probably been easier and we would have seen some quicker results if we just started with a lead provider. The one thing I will say is when we started with some like paid search, we actually had a lead come through and they became a client. I would just say, I love to fish. So I would say it's one of the few and rare times where a fish jumps into your boat. And so the good thing about that is, it let us know what's possible, right? There was a lot of hope. And so it was like, hey, this came in and we were able to handle it. It became a client. I don't think it was all the skill that we had to be able to do that because we just started this whole program, but this is what's possible. If you can do this really, really well, then you can have more of those results. And so, you can call it beginner's luck, whatever you want to call it. I'm fine with taking that, but I think for me, it was hope into what is possible with a program like this.
Yeah, and I think based on our conversations, love the notion of diversification, whether it's paid or search originated. But I think your key message is get the top of funnel in order. Figure out where those leads, those prospects are going to come from. I think there's a lot of firms have different ways, BDOs or callers. Some, those leads may go directly to the advisors. But if you can get the right top of funnel, it's going to make the rest of the process certainly better. Not easy, but certainly better.
For sure. I was thinking about this actually the other day because you and I had talked about it briefly. And, a lot of people will say this whole, crawl, walk, run analogy. And I agree that that's a fairly good way to think about it. I would just add to it that think about the distance that you're setting up for yourself. So if you're crawling, is it a football field or is it 10 feet? How big of a hurdle or how big of a path, a runway have you given yourself for each phase? And the shorter you can make that path, the quicker you can transition to from a crawl to a walk to a run. And then when you run, that's where you really want the long path so that you can, live in the success in what you've built.
Yeah, have that instrumentation in place, be able to measure, know what's important, and then know what those the exit criteria, from that crawler to the walker. What's that exit criteria? What do I need to know is true in order to change to the next phase? And I love that notion of putting a timestamp on that. How long do I have? And that might be how much volume I put through the system at that given phase, because we do want some statistical significance on what we put through a system, but time box it so that you can get to the good stuff.
Something that's important around time boxing it is also time box your changes. If you make a change today, and then you make a change tomorrow, but then you have a good result, which change was it, today's or tomorrow's? And so give yourself, even as much as I love to look at the data and kind of really figure out what's going on, you have to make a change and then, hey, we're not touching anything until we have, 20 leads come through the system and we can kind of see how that works. Whatever your number is, maybe it's 100, 200, 300, whatever the number is, kind of put those constraints on yourself so that you don't over modify the system and you actually make it worse than what it could be.
Awesome. Well, Caleb, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you sharing all this insight. Appreciate the work that we've been doing together for a number of years now. And we'll talk soon.
I appreciate it, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Organically podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit catchlight.ai, where you can access all our podcasts, including show notes and other resources to keep learning. This podcast was produced by Catchlight Insights, LLC. It is for informational and educational purposes only. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer or recommendation of any securities and is not intended to provide tax, legal, or investment advice. The views expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of Catchlight or its affiliates, and are as of the date indicated, based on the information available at that time, and may change based on market or other conditions. Catchlight does not assume any duty to update any of the information. Catchlight and other third parties mentioned in the podcast are independent entities and not affiliated. Catchlight does not endorse any investment advisor or provide advice or recommendations to any prospective or existing client of an investment advisor as to the selection or retention of that investment advisor. This information is not intended for any person or entity in any jurisdiction where the distribution or use of such information would be contrary to local law. Third-party trademarks referenced herein are the property of their respective owners. All others are the property of Catchlight Insights, LLC. Copyright 2025, Catchlight Insights, LLC. All rights reserved.
Exencial Wealth Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Any references to the term registered investment advisor or registered do not imply that Exencial or any person associated with Exencial has achieved a certain level of skill or training. The content is being provided for informational purposes only, and nothing within is or is intended to constitute investment, tax, or legal advice or a recommendation to buy or sell any types of securities or investments. The views and opinions expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Exencial Wealth Advisors, and participation in this podcast does not constitute an endorsement of Catchlight and its affiliates.